let's get into angels. We're going to be jumping all over the place. It's not like we have like a home place verse like we did with Divine Counsel. It was like, hey, Psalm 82, we're here and we're pretty much happy to go. This is like we're all over the place because there's not like really a home base for it. It's just all over. So let's start with the Hebrew Bible. Terminology. Hold tight. There's a lot of terms for beings. And the problem is that some of these words are used not just for these beings specifically. Sometimes they're used for God or places or humans, which makes it almost so much more fun to try and translate, as long as you're trying to be aware of what's going on grammatically, everything else around it. So first off, we got Ruach. This one appears 375 times. This one is a complicated word because it's used in reference to spirits, breath, and wind. All three are used in our English words for that. So, for instance, you would see in most translations in Genesis 1, you say that is the Spirit of God is hovering over the waters, or the Ruach. But then also says that he Ruached into people, and that they have the Ruach of life. Or you have that there was a Ruach who came around and was doing these things. Or it will describe the wind and this torturous wind and this Ruach. All of it means the same thing for those different things. And so it's kind of weird to figure like, how far do you go? So you just kind of have to see what the surrounding context is implying. It kind of points out, it's interesting that just how they kind of viewed the world, that spirit, if I were to simplify like spirit and wind, the fact that they're connected, the idea that perhaps, the wind was in some way connected to the presence of God as well, but also is used for every other spiritual being as well, and also used for humans and their spirits. Basically, like all the things you can't see is part of the Ruach sometimes. It's a beautiful word. It's complicated. You have Shammayim, which is weird because we've talked about before with its 418 usages that it refers to the sky, but you also have several instances where it is used and is personified and is used linked to spiritual beings. So like there's times where translators will translate as like the holy ones or heavenly ones, more often heavenly ones, since Shammayim would mean heavens. So the heavenly ones, if it's going to personify it. For instance, in Psalm 89, you get the heavens are the ones praising Yahweh. And then it links to the heavens being tied to actual persons as well. So in a sense we could say, well, yeah, the skies proclaim, but then also is used as personified language, and then it's also used later on in other passages and in that passage as well, tied to actual beings up there. So all of this is kind of linked, and it kind of makes sense. You'd expect, if the sky is the heavens, you'd expect the heavenly ones to be up in the heavens. So you can kind of play with that word and understand, I guess, what they're trying to do, but it's interesting. You got kokavim. This one, considering the previous word, it makes sense that the biblical authors would use this one. This is the word we translate as stars, typically. And so you have a kokavim, which would be in the stars. So kokavim makes sense since it's the stars. You'd expect the stars to be somewhat related to the idea of heavenly creatures because it's up there. And in Genesis 1 and 2, it refers to them as the host. It refers to them as signs and banners. Refers to them as like their role is to, for lack of better word at the moment, image God in heaven towards the earth. So when you look up, there's something with the stars, which is why when you get to things like the idea of like astrology, and that's an ancient idea going way, way back. You find like in First Enoch where they're tying the idea to the angels are guiding humans to learn to read the stars, to determine, understand what's going on in the heavens based on how the stars are moving, all those kinds of things, and what that means for things down here. Of which God says, no, don't do that. That's not what that's for. They're meant to be up there to reflect what I do down here. So they're like the representatives up here and we're the representatives down here. They image him up there, we image him down here. We then have kedoshim, which is often translated as holy, and is used 168 times. Some cases, the holy ones, one is used of a person. So the word can be used to refer to something that is holy, or it can be used to refer to a person who's holy. And often you have it tied to spiritual beings, meaning they're the holy ones. Well, why are they the holy ones? Because they're set apart and they're within the presence of God. So they're holy because they're the ones that are set apart to be in his presence, to be actually up there with him. Whereas the other ones, they have, they're not in his presence, such as like the ones who rebelled against him. They're no longer set apart for that purpose. They have forsaken such a purpose. You get Elohim, which we talked about numerous times, where it's a general word for how we translate God and gods. It might make people more comfortable to say spiritual beings. But it's just, we just translated God and gods because that's just the word we had for it. You then get Edah, which refers to an assembly, which we talked about last time with the divine council. You get Sod, which refers also to a council. You also get Kuhal, which is a congregation. Again, stand above, so you're getting a lot of grouping language. You get, let's see, Moed, assembly. You get Din, court. You get Tsar. This one's interesting. This one is often translated as prince. So if we were to turn to like Daniel, you would see in there where it talks about the prince that is coming and how he's stopped by another prince, but then Michael gets involved and then it calls him this prince. And so Michael, we know, is an angel or another spiritual being that is of God's throne room area. And so he's involved. And so they sometimes refer to them as princes. If we think about the divine council idea, this makes sense, where you have this idea that if he delegated or dispersed them to their own Elohim, that they would be the rulers. So to call them the prince over these things kind of makes sense to call them that. It also kind of makes sense to say they're a prince when God is king. Just another kind of interesting thing there. They're like these little princes. They have like the role of ruler, but they're not the king. They're not the guy. So if I were to read this quote here, not all members of the heavenly host bear this title. The princes of supernatural realm are to be identified with the sons of God assigned to the nations of the world in divine judgment by the Most High. These are the princes over nations that oppose Yahweh and his people. This is based on the work of Heiser in his book Angels. It could be noted that at times it also is used for ones that are not in opposition to God, such as Michael in Daniel 10 and Daniel 12. At times it is also translated as commander. Don't worry, we're almost done with the words. These are all important words. We're not going to go through all of them. Don't worry about that. Just saying that if you want to get into these, you can get a Hebrew concordance out, or like Logos or Bible Hub, plug these words in, and you can start to have some fun looking around at all these words. So I'm just kind of giving you a place to look for them. You got Malak, which is the most popular word known as angel. But Malak means messenger. So does angelos. So when we consider angel, technically that means messenger, and Malak means messenger. So the question that becomes, how do we know if it's a messenger that is of the divine realm or of the human realm? Well, it depends on the context around it. The context around will point towards the ontology of whether or not it is a human messenger or divine messenger, or if it is the divine messenger, meaning Yahweh, Malach Yahweh, so the angel of the Lord. Almost done. We got more words. Hebrew is all over the place with the words. This one is different kind of words here. So we get sheret or shert. Sheret refers to ministers, which also kind of implies a role that they play. We'll get more into that in a second. You then get Irin, which is watcher or angel. This one is used the least in the Bible because it is used it's an Aramaic word. So it's going to appear in Daniel, which is where we slip in some Aramaic stuff, and we translate as watcher, which is a lot of his wording is going to be very similar to what we get with Enoch and the language it uses. Enoch kind of uses the same language as Daniel in this card. We then get Shabbat or Sabah, which refers to the host. It's like a military gathering of people. So the heavenly host, like the heavenly military kind of thing. You then get Giborim and Avarim or Abarim. This is one we're going to look at a lot next week because Giborim is used, it's referred to as mighty ones. It's often, at least in the more popular discussed passages, are used of negative connotation. So we refer to those who are rebellion to God. So we'll look at that next week. We get Melish, which is a mediator, such as in Job 33:21. And then you get Cheruvim and Seraphim. So no, it's technically not cherubim or cherubim. seraphim. It's cheruvim and seraphim. And so the cheruvim are the one-headed, four-faced creatures with 6 wings and all the wild stuff. Actually, no, they have the 4 wings. It depends on the text you're reading. They have like multiple wings, and they have the human body, and they're covering themselves. But they also carry, in some passages, they carry the throne, and other ones they're just in the presence of. They also the ones that were blocking off the garden. You have the seraphim. And I linked them together because whether or not they're the same or very just similar in their role is kind of the question. So the seraphim, there was debate in scholarship, but when you consider the roots, it just kind of makes more sense that they're referring to spiritual beings, because seraph you would often translate as like something related to snake and the serpent, not the same as nachash, but very similar. And then you also have seraphim, which is used of these heavenly beings, and seraph also refers to like burning ones. So be like, oh, it must be like these are just like flaming angels. Like, no, because it's used of a snake as well, and if you tie burning and snake, it's referring to the venom. It's like these poisonous. So you have these like, and so what would be like an example of this would be like a cobra. And so it makes sense because seraphim were very much thought of in Egyptian thought, where you had the wings, they call them, were extended in a lot of their art, and they were thought of to be like the wings. They were represented wisdom and access to the divine realm. Snakes were, at least. So the reason why I say you can go back and forth is there's a sense in which seraphim really only appear in Isaiah, which has some Egyptian context to it. And then the other ones, considering that Israel is hugely in conflict with Babylon a lot of times, it makes sense like in Ezekiel and beginning of Genesis, where they're playing against the different language that Babylon is using to describe the spiritual beings as cheruvim, because that's how the Babylonians viewed spiritual beings. Then you go to John, where he describes beings that are like similar to both of them, where they're also in the throne room, they also have multiple wings, and they have all these different animal faces and things, but they're not described the same as the cherubim or the seraphim. So the question is, are these just divine accommodations for the prophets to understand what's going on, and therefore these are all the same kind of beings, but they're just being shown differently? Or are these actually different beings, but they share a very similar role? I lean the divine accommodation route just because of the sheer lack of discussion on seraphim within the Hebrew Bible. But I'm not against the idea that there's seraphim and cheruvim. That doesn't bother me. To me, that they just kind of do the same thing. So it seems like they would be the same thing, but used differently. So that's terminology. If you want to do a Bible study on any of those, when I send you the notes, literally find it on the easiest one to do. It would be like Ruach. Easiest, I say, even though it's the longest, apart from Elohim. But that's right in the first chapter of the Bible. So you just find Spirit of God, highlight, click, ta-da, Ruach, and then you just trace it. Yay! And then you get to be as blown away by its usage as I am. So a few important questions before going really forward, because we're going to get into a little more what they do. So just a couple quick questions. I have short answers up here, but I have longer answers here. So I'll kind of go over them short. I'll do like a middle. If you want to read my longer answers, they're there. I think my notes are about 10 pages. It's not terrible. I really tried to condense them so that we're like a little more readable. So, is the heavenly host eternal? No. They are, in what some scholars say, they're immortal, meaning that they don't have like a time limit to their life like we do, but they're completely dependent on God, which means God, who has said that he is the creator of all things that are seen and unseen, they're dependent on him for their creation, and he can decide that they're not going to be mortal anymore. As they say in Psalm 82, you will die like men. There will be a time when you are just no more. Like your basic, like wherever you understand that death is, whether it just be cut off or annihilation or just in hell, whatever you want to kind of go into those different things. The idea is that they will have the same fate as men. Their immortality is completely dependent on him. You could also say everlasting in some sense, but we want to say eternal because eternal we typically tie to God, meaning there is no beginning, there is no end to him. They have a beginning, they're in him, but they don't have a marked end. It's not like there's nothing in the text that implies that, humans live, let's say the average human was roughly around 70-ish years. There's not like that time limit for them that we are aware of. So another question would be, what attributes do they kind of possess? In short, there are similarities between us and God. I'll read a couple of them down here. These beings seem to have very similar attributes to us and God, just that they can do more than we. So in the idea that they have, they're rational, they seem to have, like, because they're engaging in dialogue within the council, they are aware of things, they're able to engage in different areas. So for instance, from the cognitive standpoint, they know a lot, and they know a lot more than we do. And they have a lot more wisdom than we do, because they've been around for a much, much longer time. They've seen humanity fall. They've seen humanity in its great moments and its bad moments. They understand us better than we understand ourselves. You could argue because they just understand how humanity works. And so they have a good practice of engaging. Caleb has said multiple times, like, the devil is nothing's really new to him. He's pretty much, he's much smarter than you. He knows how to get around you. He knows, like, if this button's not going to work, he'll try. And he's like, oh, I got like 20 of the buttons I can push, and one of them will work. He's like, I've seen this before. I know how this is going to play out. Similar thing for them. They've seen these for a while, but if we take things like Genesis 2, where it talks about, like, having the wisdom, they become like one of us. They have this knowledge. They have this wisdom that we don't necessarily have. They know things more than we do. And they also have a different kind of access to God. They're also not physical beings, but they can take on a physical form, at least physical in however we understand it. So they're spiritual, but they can appear in physical, and they can engage in the physical. Not even just like they appear, I'm like, yo, hologram. No, like they can pick up and eat things. They can engage with the world around them, while still not being human. So they can do a whole lot more than we can do, but they're also, therefore, not human beings. They're not creatures in the regards like material creatures. That's not their, like, ontology. It's not their natural state. So a lot of similarities, especially since they kind of like image him up there, but they have a different set of access to things because they're spiritual and then we're physical, if that makes sense. Do they have some level of free will? Kind of have to say that if they're rebelling. Free will entails that you have the ability to, one, choose between two goods. Free will does not mean you can, it does not mean that there only must be an evil choice. It must be between a good choice and an evil choice. You can have two good choices and choose between those two. But it also it also points to the idea that there is the potential for something evil to happen. So if you have ones who are at one point in line with God, and then they're in a state of not being in line with God, that's something they had to choose to do. That's why it talks about how the devil's pride and all these things kind of built up in him when he chose to rebel against God. It wasn't God said, hey, you're going to rebel against me now. There's nothing in the text that implies that, because that would really kind of bring into question God's character. They seem to very much have clear choices, and they even bring things forward to God saying, hey, can we do this? Can we do this? He's like, no, yes, no, yes. And so they're able to kind of rationally go through things and go back and forth. Yeah, I want to read this quote from Ian Ford Terry. The forms that angels take depend largely on their function as decreed by Yahweh. So now we're going to kind of get into, like, the roles and functions, and they all are sourced in him. So, like, these different words that are used. Some of these words we're about to see entail what their actual job is. And some of them don't. They just talk about what they are. And so we're going to kind of look at some of them. Some of them are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. They're called this, so it makes sense they're called this. But not everyone is given the exact same role, we're going to see. Like, you have ones who are in the council. You have ones who are messengers. You have ones who do this. You have ones who do that. So we'll look at a few of them. So what do they do in the Hebrew Bible? Most of the words laid out pretty well, as I said. Different roles these beings may take on. Angel, for instance, is technically a role as well. So we kind of get the idea of angel and demons a little towards the Septuagint, very much towards some of the church fathers, really much more into the medieval periods when we kind of get into the idea of angel good guy, demon bad guy. The idea is very much there early on, but that's when it's like, this is how we talk about angel good guy, demon bad guy. Because for instance, you have Justin Martyr, who's talking about, like, angels in regards to every kind of spiritual being are angels, and then he talks about demons in a different way, that there's something else, but they're related. You have in the Septuagint where they might use the word that we understand as demon, but it's not always used culturally the same way. And so, like, that word even has more baggage behind it, which we'll look at next time. And then the word angel can be used of the human and of the spiritual being as well. So you can call them angels, demons. That's fine. We all know what you mean. But when we see these words, we need to understand that there is a certain role that comes with some of these words behind them. So one of the roles It's divine counsel. We talked about that last week. So these are the verses we talked about before. We have 1 Kings 22, 19 to 23, where they're trying to decide, what do we do about this king? How do we remove him from his throne? And so they have this decision to, let's do, we could do this, we could do that. And the ultimate decision was, we're going to send this one spirit down to feed information to his prophets to lead him to the position where he's going to die. You have Psalm 82, where God is chastising these rogue members of the council. You have Psalm 89, where it talks about the assembly and how they're up there with him, they're praising him, but there's no one else not in a single member in that crowd who's like God in the slightest. You have Job 1 and 2, where they're coming in and out, and they're like telling about the things that they've been doing. They're giving account of all the work they've done. And you have Daniel 7, where there is Ancient of Days who sits and he opens the books, but then also the court, it says the court plural, then sits and the book opens. Well, the Ancient of Days is already sitting, so someone else is already sitting. And it's not the Son of Man, he hasn't shown up yet. And so the court sits and they're all engaging, it seems to be, in the discussion of what is the fate of the 4 monsters that have come out of the ocean, the chaos water in Daniel 7. And so you have all these different passages where they're engaging in judging, they're engaging in decision making, they're engaging in sharing information, what they've been doing, how they've been ruling over things, how they're what they think is working, what they think is not working, all those kinds of things. This kind of is divine counsel-ish, because you could talk about this idea that there are members who are in rebellion, and therefore there's a sense where they're not part of the council, but they still have their nation that they're over. And so in Deuteronomy 32, you have that they're spread out, and for a time it seems to be that they're loyal to God. If we understand Job 1 and 2 could be like the ones who are over these nations are coming in and out, discussing about the things that are governing over these nations. But then we get to Psalm 82, God's railing on them for the very fact that you have failed to do your job. You have been favoring the wicked. You've been doing these awful things. You will die like every other man, and your throne will fall apart like every other ruler and prince. There's nothing special about you. You will collapse and fall apart. And then the very end is the cry that Yahweh, these are your nations. Basically claim them. Take them. They're yours. Well, the ones that read, the only time you see the nations being inherited something else, or the very language of this inherited language is the very fact in Deuteronomy 32, you have the dispersion of the nations. So there's a layer of which that they're governing. There's a time when they were good, and there's times where some of them have gone rogue and have left. You get messengers. This is Malak and Ir, which is our watcher's word. So I put one for each, where you can kind of see both are being used. You get Daniel 4, 13 through 14. I was looking in the vision of my head as I lay on my bed, and look, a watcher and a holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud, and so he said, and he continues on to share this message of what is to happen. But we have this word for watcher, so the Aramaic word, to describe the watchers. They're the ones, basically the angels, the messengers. They watch over things and they come to bring this message. But also, we then have, and a holy one, and that's where we get the Shammayim, where we have the words used for sky, but it's also being used for a person. Well, we don't have the sky coming down. It seems to be that if this is a figure that's coming with him, and they're in this discussion, they're bringing this message forward for Daniel. You get something very similar in Genesis 19. The 2 angels came to Sodom. These are the 2 angels that are with the angel of the Lord in prior, where they're talking with Abraham. These are the 2 other men that are figures that are sent out, and they're the ones that are to bring Lot and his family out. If you watch the Bible show, however, on History Channel, they also apparently were great swordsmen, apparently very skilled at fighting. Not sure why we threw that in there, but we did. Apparently, they were very, very talented fighters. In short, that their role was to be a messenger, and they're to kind of lead people and to do things. They probably were. It's the very fact that there's nothing in Genesis 19 that talks about them ever doing that. But they most certainly were probably very good at fighting. No, they didn't even. They blinded them. Yeah, there's no reason to fight them, to chop them down, to slice and dice. There was no reason for that. Purely just for fun television. But anyway, so their role is they're to bring messages. They're bringing the message of, hey, God is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. It's time to go. And they might lead people out of there. And sometimes you see where the Son is the one who's also being the messenger of the Father. He's also claiming to be the one that is Yahweh at the same time. So you also have Yahweh coming down as a messenger and bearing these different things. Sometimes he'll send someone on behalf of him, might be a prophet, might be an angel, or it will be God himself just showing up saying, yep. And the difference is those ones are all saying, thus says the Lord, this is this and this. Angel Yahweh shows up. I am Yahweh, and you're going to listen to me right now. So spiritual beings of God's throne room can also take on ministerial roles. So we have like in 1 Kings 19:5-6. He laid down and slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him. Arise and eat. So these angels brought food to him, and he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So you have this being who's come down to bring nourishment, to tend to those. This happens several times. In fact, they even come to minister to Jesus in the New Testament. It says at the end of his testing by the devil in the wilderness, they come and minister to him. They bring him the nourishment that he's needing. It's right there in Mark 1:13. He was in the wilderness 40 days, being tempted by the Satan. He was with the wild animals, and the angels were ministering to him. So angels can be this role of they bring and provide. Sometimes God will send some to bring a message. Sometimes he'll send some to care for his people, care for those who are faithful to him. Then there's like the throne room guys. In general, this is kind of like all of them, but then there's some where you could argue they're a little ambiguous on what do you do with this. So this is kind of where we get into like the question of the seraphim and the cherubim. There's a sense in which you could say that they're part of the council, and they probably most likely are. But when they appear in language, they're being described, at least with like the cherubim, they're like holding up the throne. They're praising God. They're worshiping Him. I mean, they all do this, but they're the ones we get the most explicit, like they're worshiping all these things. Seraphim, God says, who will go for us? So it seems to be like they're engaged in the conversation, but also they're there worshiping and drawing attention to him as well. So we get Luke 2:13-14, and just like the New Testament examples, just to kind of show the thought that's carried over. And suddenly there was with an angel a multitude of the heavenly hosts praising God and saying, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among those with whom he is pleased. In Revelation 4:8, and the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around, within, and day and night. They never cease to say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Again, if you go to Isaiah 6 or Ezekiel 1, Daniel 7, Ezekiel, many other places, they're also praising God. This is not an exhaustive list. There's like a bunch of sub things in there, but they effectively follow under one of these categories. Second Temple, things get weird. So Ian Ford Terry again. The late Second Temple period, angels became progressively more hierarchically differentiated and individualized as simultaneously a similar systematization occurred with their demonic counterparts. While the angels were grouped into hierarchies with various archangels forming a chain of command all the way up to a completely transcendent Yahweh, so too were the fallen angels and demons grouped under various infernal rules, the greatest of which were latter variously associated with the devil of the Christian tradition. So effectively, the Jews got really thinking about spiritual beings during the second Temple period. They thought a lot about this stuff. So there's a plethora of information. I'm just going to kind of provide very short examples of this. Probably the most notable of this is when you get into the hierarchy. The most notable one, I think, that people are more fascinated by, so I'm going to include this in the notes, is that of archangels. So another word that can be used is like angels of the presence. And so depending on the text, there's like 4 to 7 archangels. Most notably, you would have like Gabriel, Michael, Uriel, and Raphael. And you have like a couple more. We'll kind of look at those in a second. I'm going to read some of those texts. So just to kind of look at a few of them, we have, for instance, we have Tobit. This is in chapter 12, verse 14. I am Raphael, one of the 7 angels who stand ready and enter before the glory of the Lord. So he's one of the 7 that enter before. So We read things like in First Enoch, in the book of the Watchers, like the first book in there. There's a section where they Enoch. Sorry, no. The angels are up there, and they're like, "What the heck is happening down there? This is not good." And they go talk to God to say, "What are we going to do about this?" Effectively. And then when they talk to Enoch later about what God has said that they're going to go do, they reveal what they're over, and there's like different categories of things they're over. So we then also get Jubilees, chapter 127. This is not going to be in Deuterocanonical collection. This book is interesting. It has another look on Genesis and a little bit of Exodus and other things. It's considered to be in a collection called the Pseudepigrapha, which is these other special writings, but they're not kept in the collection of like they're not like in the collection of even like the Deuterocanonical, but they're very interested. So in Jubilees you have, and he said to the angels of the presence, write for Moses from the beginning of creation till my sanctuary has been built among them for all eternity. So now he has like, this is one of the guys saying, go do this. You have Jubilees 2:2, for on the first day he created the heavens which are above and the earth and the waters and all the spirits which serve before him, the angels, plural, of the presence, and the angels of sanctification. So there's a distinction between the presence angels and the sanctification angels. So you have those who are like in his presence, they're the ones who are there with him. So they probably like the guys. They are in the throne room with him, and then they go out. And then you have the ones of sanctification, of making things holy. They're the ones to go out with the message. Let's go to First Enoch. This is chapter 9, so this would be in the book of the Watchers. It's probably the most famous and most known book because it's the one people always go to regarding like the Nephilim and the other things. Also, people tend to kind of jump off after the first book. It seems so weird. But there's also the book of the parables and the book of I always forget what it's called. But it's basically like book of astronomy, I think it is. Or book of weather, I think it is, regarding like how the weather and all these things work. But First Enoch, chapter 9, verse 1, and then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, so there's at least your 4 archangels, looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth and all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. We're going to look more at First Enoch next week because, again, the New Testament people talk about these things and they also use it sometimes in reference to the angels and the good guys and the bad guys. So it's on their minds. We got to be aware of like what's happening here a little bit. It's going to be weird, but it's actually not that super weird. In short, what's happening is the sons of God are these angels that were on effectively Mount Bashan, and they have decided they want to take wives of the humans, and then that they're also going to teach them like different ways of things. So they start to teach them the ways of like sword making, way of like analyzing stars, the way of engaging in magic, the way of engaging in potions and all these things. And it's leaned to not just like the perversion of like this idea of the mixing of the human and the angels. It leads to the perversion of now there's like a lot more violence happening. And so the angels are like, there's so much blood that's being shed because these guys on there are teaching them the ways of warfare. Caleb jokes like, well, Cain kind of beat him there when they stoned his brother. But they've built weaponry now. This is where the idea of weaponry is being developed, and this is where warfare really starts to kick in at least for the author's mind and for some of the Jews. So here you get the 4 archangels. That's really the point. We get 4 angels of these guys here. You get First Enoch again, chapter 20, and these are the names of the holy angels who watch. You have Uriel, one of the holy angels, who is over the world and over Tartarus. So Uriel he's over just the world in general. He's just kind of watching over things. More specifically, he watches over Tartarus, which is a very specific section in the Underworld. It's like the lowest point, where like the baddest of like especially the spiritual beings are sent. So Uriel's like watching over like those rebels down there. You get Raphael. He's one of the set apart angels who is over the spirits of men. So he's watching over the spirits who are engaging with men and just watching over the spirits that are in men. So his job is to watch over humans. Uriel's job is to watch over the world itself, specifically the underworld. You get Raguel, this is where you get a different one. This is one of our 7. One of the holy angels who takes vengeance on the world of the luminaries. So his job is to basically kind of bring God's vengeance and justice You have Michael, one of the holy angels, to wit, he that is set over the best part of mankind and over chaos. So he oversees order. It's like the chaotic realm of order and mankind, especially the better parts of mankind. So he's like watching over Israel a little bit. You get this one's a hard one. Sarakael, one of the holy angels, who is set over the spirits who sin in the spirit. So he's watching over the other rebels, the ones who are not necessarily in Tartarus right now. He's watching over just the guys that are out there. You have Gabriel, one of the holy angels, who is over paradise and the serpents and the cherubim. So he's over the seraphim, cherubim, and the idea of just the paradise itself. He was watching over that which is God's presence. He's kind of like just watching over those things. He's over those angels. And then you have Remiel, one of the holy angels, whom God set over those who rise. So it was basically like those who are rising up, those who are being born. He's watching over all these little ones, and all these kind of things. So these different 7 angels, they're watching over basically the different parts of the cosmos, and they report to him. It's not that he needs this. We talk about the divine council. It's the idea in Jewish mind that God has delegated these things, but they ultimately report to him. Hence why they're the angels of the presence. Again, this is where things kind of just get wild and weird. So the further down the rabbit trail you go, Michael tends to be addressed as if he is the head of the angels itself. So it's almost like people are asking about hierarchy. You have Michael, the rest of the 6, or you could say Michael, the rest of the 4, and then the rest of the 7. Then you have the council, and then you have the messengers, and you then have like the ministers, and then anyone else that's there. Because the archangels, at least in this idea, oversee everything, but they only oversee certain things. And Michael's like the guy over all of it. Under the Trinity, who is overseeing literally everything. But Michael seems to be given like this most credit within the angelic realm. If we go to Daniel 10, verse 12 and 14 again, we looked at this before, but then he said to me, "Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and humble yourself before God, your words have been heard, and I have come because of your words. The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the king of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days." So we have a messenger who is coming, a prince was in the way, and Michael gets involved. So the prince would then be a spiritual being that Michael's like, knock it off, I'm in charge here. So this would be one of the ideas that Michael has a certain authority over the angels. This seems to then bring up the question within Second Temple texts of maybe he is the second power. If you remember way back, I guess not that way back, but a little bit back, we talked about 2 powers of heaven. And there's like the different theories of who that second power is. Maybe it's Adam, maybe it's Moses, maybe it's Uriel, maybe it's Jacob, maybe it's Michael. It's because he's seemed to be like one of the chief guys. So maybe he's God's second in command, or like the second person of the Trinity. And then it doesn't seem to ever really back that later on. The further you go, Michael seems to be like, nope, he's just over the angels, but then there's God. Because Michael is very much treated like his own separate thing. He's not one of the guys. He's not the guy. He's just a guy over the guys. But then there's the guy, which is Yahweh, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And so, however, this doesn't match the New Testament theology, and it was not fully accepted within Jewish circles, as since the fact that they kept with a bunch of theories. Maybe it's Adam, maybe it's Moses, and all the different things. So it tries to account for the idea of the presence of Yahweh being in the angels by saying that they are the angels of presence, but does not account for the blurring of identities. So and also you have the fact that he's one of the ones coming up to God and is like, what do we do? Well, the Son would be one that does not need to say, what do we need to do? He would know what to do because he's one with the Father. So the very fact that he's like, it implies that he's not the guy. He's not the Son. But he's still up there. Like, he's still higher up than some of the other ones. And also, like I said, it doesn't account for the blurring of identities. Michael is his own separate identity in regards to Yahweh, whereas the angel of Yahweh blurs the line between Yahweh the invisible and Yahweh the visible. They're both called Yahweh. Michael's called Michael. There's not that blurring of the lines between the two. So let's go on to, there are different classes of angels. This is one of the longer ones. One of the thoughts is that everything, even like the weather, something spiritual is involved behind it. That was one of the thoughts. That there was some kind of, and this kind of plays into a little bit into some of the other thoughts within the pagans as well. Like there's other ones that are over these things, and that explains sometimes like why maybe there's like a longer drought, or there's a longer this or this. And so there's a thought that maybe God is working similar in this way, but he's delegating this. So he's the ultimately has thought over this and can control it. He's not dependent on them to do it, but he's at least sharing that authority with them. Again, Jubilees is not considered, it is pseudepigrapha, so it's not even in the primary collection or the secondary collection. It's just one of the collections. But it explains the Jewish thought. They're very fascinated by everything going on. They're thinking angels must be involved in all these things. So this indicates that they thought the natural world, regarding its physical process, were under the control of angels. And you can find this also in 1 Enoch 60 through 20 and 16 and 22. And you have 82, 9 through 20. They're like, this is why you get like the book of the weather. They're like, oh, they're involved in this, they're involved in that, they're involved in this. Are they actually? Bible never said so. So we're just assuming a lot right now. Possibly. Might be a little bit of a stretch. Who knows? Especially because we have a way to kind of like identify these things. So don't know if we're going to say that spiritual beings are the natural process of this world. They could be involved. Probably not. But is there thought? Is there thought? It's the thought that's developing into the New Testament time period. We also get, let's see, 1 Enoch 6 through 6:10, and he will summon all the hosts of heavens and the holy ones above, and the hosts of God, the cherubim, the seraphim, and the ophanim. First one we get these ones, and all the angels of power and all the angels of principalities. So you get this all different classifications: seraphim, cherubim, ophanim. You get the angel of power, angels of principalities, and just different classes of beings. And then you have the Testament of Levi, chapter 3, section 5, archangels, messengers, thrones, authorities, etc. I could just list off all these different classes of angels. Then you get into interesting thought: 7 tiers of heaven. So not only are there different hierarchies, but there's tiers within the heavenly realm itself in the skies. A lot of sections, apparently. Name a couple of them. Yes, we have the lowest for this cause more gloomy is near all the iniquities of men. This would be the underworld itself. You get the fire, snow, so place of judgment, but also weather. You get the armies of the hosts, which are ordained for the day of judgment. You get above these are the holy, from the highest of all dwell, the great glory and the holy. And you're just climbing up higher and higher, going from like basically the pits of death all the way up to God, into these different things, like these different 7 tiers, which 7 is a number of completion. So you're getting this build up. This is why I said Second Temple, and this is just an introduction, is a lot. It's so much. It's. I wasn't joking. Things get weird. It's fascinating though. It's really interesting to kind of think how they were trying to figure these things out. They were really, really focused on this stuff. We're good on Second Temple. Okay, so we have Hebrew Bible, which gets the language going. We do have some structure, more about their role and their participation in relation to humans and the divine realm. Get Second Temple, where they're starting to talk about hierarchy and also the roles in not just the human ordeals, but the world itself. Whether or not this is true or not, there's layers of which I would say not, just because we do seem to have figured out some of these things from a more natural way, but it doesn't exclude the idea of there still being supernatural things involved, because the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament talk about them in, especially they do have a connection with like things of the natural world, but they definitely have a lot more to say about their role in connection with human beings and God. So that's where we're going to turn to the New Testament very briefly. We're going to do our best to just do a survey of everything. Greek, not nearly as bad on its terminology. It is not 3 slides long, whereas the Hebrew was 3 slides long. Second Temple was just a wild trip. So we get theos, primarily used in the New Testament referring to God himself. There is a couple spots, like 8 times, where they are used in general to refer to other beings. However, sometimes they're dunking on these other beings. Like Paul is hardcore dunking on them. He's like almost like sarcastically referring to them this way. You get pneuma. This is kind of like the equivalent to the Hebrew regarding ruach and spirit-ish. It's kind of weird because pneuma kind of plays into it. There's another word, I can't remember what it is right now, but I was looking at for another passage that also kind of plays into some of the idea of nefesh, which deals with the throat and the body. Oh, sorry, it was suke. Kind of deals with that a little bit, but also it kind of deals with, so it kind of deals with nefesh, but it kind of leans into the ruach. Pneuma is probably the closest with the New Testament that really plays into that language. You have angelos, which is going to be dealing with angels. That's our messenger, whereas our Malak. Raneos, you got doxos, photon, archangelos. Most important, we're going to see some of the repeating ones, like archangels reappear. Pneuma, kind of like the equivalent to ruach. Angels, kind of the equivalent to Malak. Theos, kind of the equivalent to Elohim, depending on how it's being used. Because again, they're not using it as freely as the Hebrew Bible does with Theos. They use Elohim like anything that is spiritual. And then the New Testament is like pretty much God is Theos. Sometimes we'll mention the other guys. And sometimes we're just dunking on them. The slide here is going to be shorter because New Testament doesn't really do anything new with the language. It more so either just affirms or continues the language of the Old Testament, some of the Second Temple as well. So we say that they are in some sense related to natural forces. You get Hebrews 1:7, where it says, and the angels, he says, who makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. So there's a layer of which that's tied with judgment and also presence, but also it's also elemental language is being used. It's also quoting Psalm 104. So it's calling back to creation, one of the creation texts out there that kind of looks back on creation and gives different perspectives on God's ordering things. We talked about this during the Chaos Monster series. They can and have taken on physical form that not only appear physical, but interact in the physical world. So you get this in like Acts 27:23, where it says, and behold, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared, and a light shone in the cell, and he struck Peter's side. So we have him actually striking him. It's not like he just appeared and he's like, yo, wake up. Hits him and woke him, said, get up quickly, and his chains fell off his hands. So it's not just like they appear there. It's this weird thing where they do take on a physical form and engage with the physical realm. Again, they're found to be eating at times. They're found to be like touching things and moving things. You have them, again, they're ministering to other people. We saw this and with the Old Testament and New Testament. Matthew 4:11, then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and began to minister to him. Again, we read this one, but that's there. They're providing that sustenance for him as we saw in the Old Testament. You get messages in terms of dreams and visions that they can engage in that. So I mentioned that specifically because first, if you go to Matthew chapter 1, 20 through 24, and then 2, 13 and 19, we have an angel appearing to Joseph in a dream regarding Mary. That's the language that is used there in some translations. Okay, so we have in Matthew 1, Joseph has a dream. Angel appears saying, Christ is going to be born. Do not divorce Mary. Dream number 2 in chapter 2. An angel appears saying, you need to escape because he's going to try and kill your child. Go here. And then terror is over. He appears again saying, you can go back. So they can engage in the dreams of the world of humans when God sends them to go do such a thing. This is an example. If we go to Luke chapter 1, verse 8 through 23, we have an angel appearing to Zechariah in a similar fashion. You also have later on, you have this engagement with Mary, and then you have in Acts 10 with Cornelius, these visions where they're receiving visions and dreams and engaging with the Spirit's light. There's a sense where there's awake, but there's also a sense where there's asleep, like you have Joseph who is asleep. You also have them proclaiming announcements. So in Luke 2, this is when they appear in the skies before the shepherds, and they're proclaiming that the Messiah has been born.
Hiya, shepherd.
Guarantee you, it was not a silent night. Guarantee you that. Ain't no way a bunch of shepherds are going through all of town looking for this baby, reeking of the stench they are, and also trying to find this child. Ain't no way that was a silent night. Not possible. It was an excitable night, and then you also have the bright lights up in the sky. Oh my goodness. Side tangent. When people say, oh, this is what the biblical angels are, and therefore that must be why they're scared. I'm telling you right now, first off, if I was in shepherding in the field, out of nowhere, the sky lights up with all these beings that I can just see out of nowhere, I'm freaking out. Okay? I'm not going to stop at, oh, they look weird. No, there are things up there and they're talking. I wasn't ready for that. Secondly, when you keep getting different descriptions for how they look, it doesn't seem to be that is strictly what they look like. Because you have angels who appear as human, you have angels who appear with multi faces, angels who appear as snakes, angels who appear as this, appear as that, appear as this, appear. I'm using that, and you could say, well, maybe there's a different kind of classes. Again, go back to the seraphim and the cherubim. They function the exact same way, but they're described differently. And then you go to John, where he's again describing them differently. You go to just a description of God in those visions. They're slightly different. It doesn't mean that, therefore, that is exactly what they look like. So therefore, that's why they freaked out. Also, can we stop saying the wheels are angels? Can we stop saying that? Ezekiel never said that. The wheels are attached to the cherubim. They're moving the wheels. The wheels aren't alive on their own. Also, the word eyes there, within Babylonian context, most likely refers to jewels, because they called jewels eyes. So we don't need to immediately assume that the wheels are blinking at you. There's many other ways to understand that. And the wheels aren't alive. They also can be agents of judgment. Just we'll run through this quickly. In Acts 12, 23, an angel strikes down Herod. So God sends an angel to go to deal with this. You get Matthew 13, where Jesus gives a parable of the weeds and the wheat, and how the Son of Man will send his angels to gather and throw out all causes of sin and all lawbreakers. So they're the ones being sent in to gather and throw. You get so many other examples. That's why I just put the next one is just Revelation, with no verse next to it, because there's just so much revelation. It's just angels being sent to do this and this and this and this and this. I felt no need to leave you a long list of Revelation passages, because it would take up the rest of the slide. And then we get works in the heavenly realm, just in general. So this is definitely found in Revelation 4 and 5. I'll read. In general, angels are worshiping in the throne room, also functioning as a council scene. So we see that as well. To quote another scholar, the focus of the throne vision is God enthroned in his heavenly court, surrounded by a variety of angelic beings or lesser deities who function as courtiers. All such descriptions of God enthroned in the midst of this heavenly council are based on the ancient conception of the divine council or assembly found in Mesopotamia, Ugarit, and Phoenician, as well as in Israel, because the divine council was a very prominent thing in all the cultures. And so this is where we're getting idea continued in the New Testament. So the Second Temple in the New Testament continued the idea of the council being around. And one last example, I didn't put it up here on the slides, but you get in First Thessalonians 4:16, and then you get it again in Jude 9. You get archangels, of which are again showing hierarchy. So you see that they are again present, and they are involved in different things. And that, in short, in an hour and 47 minutes. Genesis to Revelation, short. Here's angels. I can guarantee you can spend a whole lot more time on this.